Australia, as we think about adopting a model that would suit our country, firstly, what sort of costs do you think are involved, or how do we need to think about the funding arrangements? And then secondly, just sort of borrowing from some of your recommendations around governance and things, what are the tips or suggestions you think we should really focus on, maybe to take the best of your experience and leave the worst of it behind?
Right. Well, from what I've learned from being here a few days in Australia, which is a beautiful country, by the way, and I love it, my stay here. But what I've learned is the government has more control here of the healthcare sector and its financing. Now, some European nations, it's almost totally financed by government, single payer system. Here it's a mix, but still in your states you have the public health hospitals are financed in that fashion, and most of the general practice physicians receive their payments from the government. So in that setting, which is fairly different, significantly different than in the US, I think in Australia, the government needs to recognize the value, obviously, of health information exchanges and fund some pilot projects. Get something out there with some rigorous attention to measurement and make sure that it is going to work. Okay, that's number one. Number two would be they have to involve, even if it's government funded or potentially private funding too, but there has to be some local control. So it cannot be governed through the nation's capital. Because most healthcare is still local. Regardless of how you fund it, that's true almost worldwide. Most healthcare is delivered local and decisions are made local. So they need to bring in local representation. Now, having said that, they also need to create standards. The government needs to create standards. So the interoperability and exchange of information makes it easier. Because you don't want to build 20 varieties of these across your country. That's what we have in the US, which is now problematic because we had no standards. And the government didn't step up to create those standards. So that's created a mess. Because we have a bunch of different HIEs, some more successful than others, but they're all built differently. We have some that were built by entrepreneurs. We have some that were built purely through public health. We have some that are built by a state. We have some that are built by local hospitals like ours.
Sounds like a mess.
And different technology platforms.
Yeah.
So if one lesson is learned from our mistakes, it's that. Create the standards up front.
Yes.
Okay. Each local area may do things a little different, which is good for innovation because you can learn from that and then disseminate that across the others for best practices. But we are going to have a problem now in the US trying to connect the health information exchanges to each other because we don't have the standards. Now, supposedly the government is coming now and saying now we're going to develop the standards, but then that means everybody has to migrate toward those standards. I would do that up front.
Yes.
I would get that into place, and while that's happening, get 2 or 3 or 4 in some populated areas, and where you have strong clinical leadership and strong administrative leadership, and get started with those and learn from that, and then disseminate it across the country.